This footage captures the reality of the first year of parenthood. A baby's first birthday party operates as a high-stakes psychological milestone, a marker of survival after 12 months of sleepless nights and relentless responsibility. One 29-year-old mother reached this milestone already depleted. She spent her daughter Lily's first year navigating a series of increasingly tense interactions with her mother-in-law, Diane, who viewed the child's upbringing as a competition. Diane frequently criticized modern parenting as too soft, claimed her own methods with her son were superior, and routinely questioned the mother's daily decisions. These consistent microaggressions amounted to a year-long psychological siege on the mother's confidence. This diagram illustrates the authority vacuum. The mother chose to absorb these hits and brush off the comments to avoid a scene. However, this lack of resistance signaled that her boundaries were permeable, creating a vacuum that invited Diane to push even further. Conflict avoidance in the face of minor boundary infractions often functions as an invitation for a larger, more destructive confrontation later on. The parents planned a modest celebration, handling the decorations and food themselves. They ordered a simple cake from a local bakery, specifically chosen to feature their daughter's name. Diane arrived at the house 30 minutes before the guests were scheduled to appear. This early arrival functioned as a territorial maneuver. It placed Diane inside the home before the mother could establish the flow of the event, clearing the way for her to deploy a specific centerpiece. Diane brought a massive 3-tier cake and placed it dead center on the dessert table. She moved quickly, positioning the object before the mother had the opportunity to intervene. The cake was a physical manifestation of a hostile takeover. Its size and placement were engineered to visually eclipse the mother's authority and her own plans for her daughter's celebration. At the peak of the party, with 30 guests gathered, Diane tapped a spoon against her glass. The room went silent as she claimed the floor for a toast. Diane looked at the crowd and said, "I just want everyone to know that behind every good baby, there's a grandma who's really doing the heavy lifting." As she spoke, Diane pointed to the icing on her cake, which read, "Happy birthday to the real mom." She then pointed directly at herself. Publicly executing a boundary violation provides the aggressor with significant leverage. It forces the victim to choose between two painful options: accept a humiliating public demotion or initiate a chaotic confrontation in front of their social circle. By claiming the title of real mother in front of 30 witnesses, Diane moved past simple criticism and launched a public challenge to the mother's fundamental identity. The immediate shock of the statement paralyzed the room. Mark, the mother's husband, went pale and stood frozen, offering no reaction to his mother's declaration. This diagram illustrates the triangle of toxicity, where the role of the enabler is as critical as the aggressor. Mark's paralysis causes the defensive line to fail, leaving his wife to face the attack without the support of her partner. With her husband silent, the mother took control of the situation. Despite her hands shaking, she picked up her daughter and addressed the room. She calmly informed the guests that the party was over and asked them to leave. Once they were gone, she told Diane she was no longer welcome in the home until she offered a genuine apology for her behavior. When a partner fails to act as a shield, the individual setting the boundary must act with total finality to preserve their own psychological safety. Diane immediately shifted into a defensive posture. She began to cry, claimed the cake was intended as a joke, and told the mother she was too sensitive to be a good mother. These responses are core components of gaslighting. The objective is to move the conversation away from the original aggressive act and refocus it on the victim's unreasonable reaction. The pressure intensified as extended family members swarmed the mother's phone. They argued Diane was old school and demanded an apology. These individuals, acting as flying monkeys, are often motivated by a desire to avoid their discomfort. They pressure the victim to yield so that the family dynamic returns to a state they find manageable. In high-conflict family systems, a group demand for an apology is often an attempt to restore the toxic status quo rather than a search for actual peace. 4 days later, the conflict reached the couple's private life. Mark argued that his wife needed to meet Diane halfway to ensure family peace. This diagram reveals why meeting halfway is a fallacy. When an aggressor seizes a core identity, compromise causes permanent loss of territory. This new position becomes the starting point for the next violation. The cycle repeats until the original boundary is completely erased. Mark claimed his wife's reaction ruined the party's mood. However, the violation of respect ruined the event. The eviction of the aggressor was simply the necessary response to that violation. Establishing a firm boundary creates immediate discomfort. Yet when fundamental respect is publicly discarded, a non-negotiable response is the only way to ensure the boundary, and the person behind it, survives.